On this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I am very happy to welcome my very longtime friend and former colleague, Dexter Greenwood. Born in Jamaica, he moved to Canada, Toronto, Canada, with his family at a very young age. He grew up there, studied there, and eventually came to Japan. We talked about what sent him back to Canada after a few great years spent in Japan, and then what ultimately brought him back to Gunma Prefecture, a prefecture a couple hours north of Tokyo on the bullet train. Dex works in the food industry here in Japan, and he's been doing a couple of restaurants in a small town outside of Tokyo for the last several years. So I hope that you enjoy hearing about his small town experiences. It's quite different from the big city experience, I think. You'll hear about the steps that he took to get to where he is today, some of the challenges that he encountered, and also some really interesting insights from his over 20 years in the country. So please make sure to check him out from the links in the description and enjoy this discussion. On this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I am very pleased to welcome my dear friend, Dexter Greenwood. Dex has so much experience in a variety of different fields, including broadcasting and food and beverage. He has lived in Japan for 20 years now?
Give or take.
Yeah, something like that. It's been nuts. We met maybe 7 or 8 years ago when we were working together on the same team. So I'm very happy that he has agreed to come and chat about his story and his experiences on the podcast this week. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thanks for having me. It's exciting. I'm really, really excited about your project.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see it and hear it actually, broadcast.
Thank you. That's so cool. And thank you also. Today is our very first distance episode.
All right.
Also, we're here in Dexter's real house, sitting at the bar in his real house. So thanks very much for letting us have this chat here. I want to ask you the same question that I ask everybody at the beginning of the podcast. I think you appreciate it as a superhero fan, as a Marvel fan. Yeah. But I ask everybody to begin to introduce themselves by sharing their origin story. What was the thing that got you started along the path that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I've given that some thought. I've given it some thought over a few years. Mm-hmm. I always wonder, how did I get here? Mm-hmm. I remember once I wrote a bio where I sort of explained that I was born in small town Jamaica, grew up in the city in Toronto in Canada, and yet somehow I've ended up cooking in the Japanese Alps.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, there's so many steps to get to here. It's almost, I didn't make a plan. I just sort of went along. Mm-hmm. Trying to make the best decisions as I went along, but here I am. So in terms of an origin story, what one thing happened to put me here? Mm. I don't have one.
Okay.
I don't have one. It's been a real mix of events that I'm just really glad occurred the way they did.
Cool. Okay. Well, if there's no moment that you feel kind of sparked everything, maybe we can kind of go back to maybe the first thing that you mentioned there, which was Jamaica.
Right.
So, were you born in Jamaica?
I was. My parents are both native Jamaicans, and I was born in a place called Duhaney Park, which is in Kingston. Mm-hmm. And when I was very young, 3 or 4, maybe even younger, my mother moved to Canada first to set things up, sort of. It wasn't uncommon back then for one parent to take care of the kids while the other moved to another country, got a job, and made themselves eligible to sponsor the rest of the family to come over.
Okay.
So that's what happened. My mother moved to Canada first, started working, sponsored the rest of the family, then brought my father, my brother, and I over. Mm-hmm. Couldn't have been more than a year and a half later. I don't remember any of that. I was really, really young, but the stories have been told and the photos are there. And so Jamaica is my heritage. And as you probably know, with most immigrant families, the place you're from is the home you're in. And what I mean by that is I would go to school in Canada and I would be learning to speak with a Canadian accent, and I would be learning Canadian history, and so everything I did at school was Canada, and when I went home, it was Jamaica. You open the door, you walk inside, the smells are Jamaica. Mm-hmm. The food that you eat, the accent that you hear, everything was Jamaica. Mm-hmm. So it was great and especially being in the part of the city that we were in, there was a Jamaican community, a West Indian community, the Trinidadians and people from Nevis, and all the countries were represented. So it was great to have sort of two worlds that you get to grow up in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How old were you at that time?
Well, 3.
And you still remember all of that?
Well, 3 until like I didn't sort of move away from the home until I went to university. So
I see.
So yeah, that whole time, 3 till 18. Yeah.
Did you ever, have any, I guess, moments in that time period? Because I mean, you were there with your brothers, your family, sisters.
No, just one older brother.
One older brother. Sorry. Were there periods of time where that maybe having those kind of two separate worlds created a challenge, or maybe kind of a disconnect for you?
Not that I'm aware of, or not that I was aware of at the time. It was just that's the way it is. There was no nothing to compare it to.
I see.
A little bit later in life, like once I got into like middle school age, I can remember some other kids joining the school from Jamaica who were quite a bit, they were older now, and because they had come from a different school system, they got put back, so they were even older. So I'm 10 years old. I'm in a classroom with a 12-year-old who just got off the boat.
Oh,
and
wow.
For him, there were great challenges and a lot of disconnect and a lot of things that were just not fitting in.
That included, I imagine, like language barrier and culture barrier? Or?
Culture barrier more than anything else, because mostly through the West Indies, English is the language spoken.
Okay.
For the most part, but obviously everyone's heard different accents.
Right.
These are the patois. It's patois is what we call it. It's just a different way of saying the English words. It's not much different than, say, someone from Louisiana speaking to someone from New York.
Right.
So not a real language barrier, just a culture barrier.
I imagine, thinking then though, I mean, from the perspective of a person who has just arrived in a new country, and maybe even though the words are the same, but the way that you speak is different.
Yeah.
I imagine that there are likely some situations where local people would look at that person differently. So even though there's not a communication problem, the local people are perhaps making assumptions about the new person because of the way they speak.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're 100% correct about that. And obviously, I couldn't talk about the way that fit into the professional world because I was a child. But yeah, teachers would just assume that you were not intelligent or that you couldn't handle the work.
Because of the way
you speak.
Spoke.
Yeah. And not so much for me, because like I said, I entered the school system in Canada. But for these guys that came along afterwards, really, really difficult and really frustrating and heartbreaking.
Because of just kind of these preconceived notions about the way a person
That's right.
speaks that way.
I remember a fellow, I won't name him, but he was very, very intelligent, and he got put back into a 2 or 3 grades before him. Like, he should have been in grade 6, and he was put into our grade 4 class.
Because of the way he spoke?
Because they didn't trust the school system that he came from.
Oh.
The way he spoke didn't help, didn't give them any more confidence.
Right.
Yeah, it was just unfair.
I see.
It was a time, though, when there was no consciousness. People didn't know anything about other cultures. The world was a lot bigger than it is now. There was no social media, no internet. There was no way to know that people in another part of the world were actually as intelligent as the people in your own part of the world. Nobody knew that. Nobody understood that. It was. I don't want to excuse it, but you can understand where the people were coming from.
I see. So people were just like,
ignorant.
We've been brought up to understand that this way is the correct way to do X, Y, and Z. If you don't do that, then you must be missing something.
That's right.
Kind of the deal.
That's right.
I see. So you had the experience of beginning in that system.
That's right.
Therefore, you had a different experience with it.
So, and I wasn't handicapped by. I wasn't handicapped by someone else's expectations of me. I started in the system, so they started me with everyone else, so I could progress with everyone else.
I see. So you mentioned that you were there in the school system until college. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then when you went to college, is that, I know that you've had some experience with broadcasting, specifically with sports broadcasting.
Yeah.
Is that where you began going down this road of
Not
sports?
at all.
No.
Not
okay.
at all. No. That was, I mean, as into my late teens. Wow, there's so much to get into with college.
Okay.
But let's just say I went to one university that wasn't quite for me, but then I ended up going to another one a bit later. Like I didn't start until I was about 21 years old.
Oh, okay.
And that one was perfect. It was small school. I was able to get to know people very quickly, make lifelong friendships. And I just did a bachelor of arts in political studies. That was.
Wow.
I just wanted to keep all my doors open.
So did you ever think to yourself, I'd like to get a job specifically related to politics?
No.
Really?
No.
Huh.
I don't even know why I chose that. I just
really, it was something to do at the
it's something
time?
to do. Yeah.
So,
my brother did poli-sci, which was a sort of a different course. But my brother was always like my hero, right? He's always been my idol. So he's doing poli-sci. It's not something I would have admitted to myself back then. When the choices are there. You're going to do English. You can do history. Oh, political studies. I'm going to do that.
My brother does political science,
Yeah.
so that's kind of, I'm not exactly the same, but
Yeah, exactly.
similar. He's got it figured out.
Yeah, well, my school, if the school I went to didn't offer political science, it was just political studies or nothing.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the closest that
Yeah.
you could get.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow, so I didn't know that about you, actually. So you're a political, what's the difference, do you know, between political science and
I didn't
political
pay
studies?
attention. I don't even know what political studies was. I was really good in the community, in the social community.
Fair enough.
Played hockey every Friday.
Okay, so that maybe leads into then, I guess, if you're in the community, you're playing sports in the community, I guess that your interest in sports came from that.
Oh,
then.
no, my interest in sports started right away.
Okay.
My interest in having a career in sports didn't come until I had actually come to Japan. And that's another story. But
Okay, we'll get to that.
yeah, but my interest in sports, I always thought I was wasting time. Because instead of studying, I'm reading Inside Sport magazine, The Sporting News, Sports Illustrated, Sport, all of them. Anything that was published, I was reading it. And I was remembering all the stats and the players' stories and where they came from and what they're doing. And I was really good at sort of saying, well, this guy's going to have a big year this year because I knew when his contract was up. And I knew his, cause
You had all the facts.
I had all the facts.
You were that guy.
yeah.
But I can see how you might think to yourself, what am I really doing spending all my time, learning these things?
Oh, yeah.
I can totally see how you would have that moment of reflection.
Well, not just me, my father. I've got stacks of magazines in his garage. And
Right.
he said, I'm going to throw this junk out. What are you keeping this junk for?
Yeah.
But he didn't throw it out. He threatened every week, but he never threw it out.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
Well, it's like it's not hurting anybody.
No,
so.
no.
Okay. So we have this sports thing that's been there forever.
Yeah.
And I assume throughout college as well,
Oh,
too.
yeah. Passionate.
So you finished college with this political studies degree.
That's right.
What do you do? What
I
do you do
have
after
student
that?
loans to pay.
Right.
So a friend of mine the year before, who graduated a year before me, he had moved to Japan to become an English teacher. Mm-hmm. And one day I get a call from him. I'll say his first name. His name was Scott. And Scott says, you got to come here because I make X amount of money for putting in about 15 hours a week.
Oh.
And I do almost nothing, and you would love it. And of course, he's right. I love getting paid for nothing.
But to be clear, like for anybody who's watching this, like in 2020,
Yeah, it's
later,
not the same.
It is extremely different.
It is not the same. Back then, an English teacher's salary was a very good salary, and you were not expected to prepare much. You just had to show up and basically model the words and be the voice
Right.
that people would repeat after and try to correct their accents. And pronunciation.
Right.
So yeah, it was a good gig, but I found not too long after starting it, like about a year into it, I was getting bored.
Oh.
I was getting bored because I really wasn't, like I said, I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't challenging myself.
Right.
I was just, and one day, I found I was nodding off in class. I knew this was not going to be for me.
Right.
I still needed to make money, so I continued the job, but a friend of mine came to me. He called me up. He said, we're going whitewater rafting. And I was living in a town called Takasaki. And he said, we're going whitewater rafting in Minakami. And I said, oh, all right, let's go. I couldn't
Sounds
swim.
Fun. Oh.
I didn't know how to swim. I didn't know.
You said yes.
I said, yeah, why not? So I got there. They put me. I'm getting off topic, aren't I?
That's okay. Keep going.
They put me in the front of the boat because the rafting guide, the boat I was getting in, the guy's name was Steve. Big fella, really big, muscular, heavy, round fellow.
Okay.
He took one look at me and said, "No, we need to balance this out." And he put me at the front, front of the boat, the opposite side of him.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So, being at the front of the boat kind of changed my life that day because the waves were whipping over. It was spring, so it was a big river, like a lot of snow melt. Getting hit in the face, and I'm loving it, and I'm yelling all the way down the river, like, "Come on, more, more, more!" We get to the end of the trip, and the owner of the company, his name was also Steve, different Steve, but he comes up to me and he says, "You know, some people's enthusiasm you can't ignore. If you want to be a guide, we'd love to train you. Come up and become a rafting guide with us in Minakami, and just work on weekends if you want, keep your job." I said, "For sure." And I jumped in, I started training. I finished that summer as a guide, as a trainee guide. And then the next summer, I didn't even bother teaching. I was just up here. I was here, and I stayed here, and that's my Minakami origin story.
Gotcha. So that's what brought you to Minakami, where we are today.
Yes.
So like a very small mountain town.
Yeah,
We're
very
far
small.
outside of Tokyo, a couple hours north of Tokyo. It
Yeah.
takes, 2 hours or so, including bullet train time to get here from Tokyo.
Right. Sure.
So that's what brought you here.
Yeah.
But you did go back. You came back to
I did.
Canada, right?
I did. I guess it was the false impression or the misimpression that 3 years was the right length to stay in Japan. Because when I first got here, I was in the English teaching community, and most English teachers couldn't go past 3 years. That was the length of the contract back then.
Right.
I don't know. So everyone that I knew was here for 3 years, and they left. 3 years, and they left.
Gotcha.
So I told myself, okay, 3 years. So I got to the end of the third year, and it was still summer, so I stayed and did some rafting until the end of that summer. And then, after 3.5 years, I went back home thinking, okay, that's it, I'm done.
Right.
But once I got home, I realized my Japanese experience is not finished. I'm not the same as everybody else. Maybe they were done with their experience. They got what they wanted out of it, but mine was not finished. And I really wanted to get back. And that was late 90s, and it was at that point that I didn't know what to do when I got home. So, loving sports, I went to do the broadcast program at a community college.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I went and I did that. It was an extremely lonely time, depressing time. I was in a class with a bunch of 17-year-olds who had never been anywhere, never done anything. And they're having a great time sitting in their dorm rooms getting drunk, and for me, that was, I don't want to say beneath me because I'd been there, not really the drunk part, but I'd been there, I'd done that, but it wasn't interesting to me at all. I was just bored out of my mind and lonely. So anyway, I pushed through, got through the course, and took a job in the city. I'm just remembering all this as we're going here. Took a job in the city at a bar in my area, where I met a fellow who was working for TSN, which is the the Sports Network Canada.
Okay.
He was working for TSN, but there was a brand new sports network coming online, a place called Sportsnet.
Okay.
And it was going to be the competition for TSN. And so he told me about this because we had talked. Good guy. We had talked, and I told him, I love sports. I've got this broadcasting background now, and I want to do something with it. So he told me about Sportsnet coming online, and he got me, because he's making the switch. He got me an interview. I got involved. I remember at my interview them asking me about, what makes a team work, and this, and I remember being able to tell them stories about my time as a rafting guide, which really was, I didn't realize that it would dovetail nicely into that, because but it really did. I mean, the things you have to do, the how you have to depend on your teammates as a rafting guide, because let's say you're playing baseball and you make an error, the other team might score, you might lose the game, you might lose the season, then you might lose the championship. So what? If you are out there and you make a mistake on the river, someone might lose a life.
Right.
So it was really, really intense, and you really had to be focused, and you had to count on your team, and you had to be a good teammate. You couldn't go off on your own and say, well, we're going to just run this rapid, we won't wait for anyone else. So, I mean, telling them stories that related to that, they were impressed, and I started working at the very bottom level, eventually worked my way up. But what was happening was I couldn't get Japan out of my system. And so...
when you say you couldn't get it out of your system, was there something that you really, really missed about being in Japan? Or was
everything.
there a certain experience or a certain something that...
I couldn't put my finger on it. It was everything. It was just everything. I had a dream job. Everybody that I'd went to school with, that I knew from high school and university, would have killed for my job. I was in the locker room for the Toronto Maple Leafs and all their playoff games. I was doing all the stand-ups and the reporting for the Raptors after their games. I was in the press box at the Blue Jays game, just watching some home runs fly past our heads. I had the dream job for any sports fanatic.
Huge.
And I just didn't want to be there. I wanted to be in Japan. And still to this day, I can't tell you why it wasn't enough for me, but it wasn't enough for me. And I knew that I'd have to sacrifice something to come back, so I did,
Right.
Those guys, okay, more of the origin story, I guess this is where it folds in.
Okay.
I was about 7 years into my career at Sportsnet, and I had still been rafting every summer. Once I did 4 years as staff, and then I went freelance. I became a freelance producer for Sportsnet. And then, so I decided not to do any gigs in the summer. I didn't take any baseball gigs or golf or any of that stuff. And I would then come back to Japan every summer to be on the river.
Awesome.
About, 7 or 8 years into it, a friend of mine, Mike, called me up. He said, some of the foreign guys that were rafting guides and senior rafting guides had gotten together, made their own company. And bought a base, a big building that had a kitchen. And he knew that while I was back home working, I had just been taking cooking courses because I've always loved cooking. So I just found a community college, took courses, and it was only going to be for a hobby. I just wanted to learn about cooking.
Sure.
I didn't even finish the course because he called me up, said, we've got a kitchen, we need a chef, do you want to come?
Oh.
The next day, I was
hard sell,
making plans to move back to Japan and cook. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a little regret that goes into that, just a little, because, the people I was going to school with, the people I was working with in another restaurant in Toronto, just to get more experience, they had the chance after school to work with a great chef, or to work with a head chef, or work with anybody with more experience than them. I got straight out of school and went and got my own kitchen. And I didn't even finish school. So
That's true. You just, I'm out. I got a place to cook.
Straight into my own kitchen. So all the mistakes that can be made, I made them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that brought you back to Japan initially. So you had this food, you had broadcasting, you had sports, you had all of this stuff that you were able to bring back here.
Yeah, and I was able to bring that back and come back to the rafting environment and have a kitchen. So I was on cloud nine. Yeah.
It's perfect. And so since then, when was that? When was the year that you came back?
2007.
2007.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been here since, and your focus here has been rafting, and then in recent years has been towards restaurant operation.
Actually, no. When I came back in 2007, that restaurant at their base was my focus.
Okay.
And I would do a bit of rafting and canyoning when I wasn't busy.
I see.
Or when they needed someone extra or whatever. But that didn't last very long. I really realized as I was making all of those rookie mistakes that I'd better focus on doing this kitchen and getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And after a season or so, I didn't do any more water work.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So then, in the course of doing that, after you came back here, then I guess it would have been maybe 5 years or so later was when we had the chance to meet through through our job. I was doing English support, and you were doing like restaurant. Your purpose was to do restaurant support for our team, the team project.
That's right.
Our team had been assembled to do a project relating to craft beer in Japan, because craft beer was starting to boom. This would have been 2012.
That's exactly right. Right after the big earthquake in 2011 is when I ended my association with canyons. I'm sorry, I'd never ended my association with canyons. They're still very, very close friends. We're still partners in many ways, but that's when I stopped working for them directly.
Mm-hmm. So that's when you came to Tokyo for like a year or so.
That's right.
To be a part of this project that had been proposed, and I was a part of the project there as well, but doing web support. Like I was doing like English translation and English presentation related support, and helping, because it was a bilingual effort.
That's right.
And so that's where we had the opportunity to meet and become friends.
Yeah.
And that was 7 years ago now, almost 8.
Almost 8, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, time flies. Holy cow. So that was what, a year or so? Year and a half?
It was a year. For me, it was a year. I signed a 1-year contract and didn't sign another one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The project, for various reasons, didn't go as expected, and so we all went in different directions.
Yeah.
You came back here.
Back to Minakami. And for some reason, even when I signed that contract and moved to Tokyo, I kept paying rent on a place in Minakami because I just didn't want to lose my connection to Minakami. And I guess, again, it's one of those things where I didn't know why, but it worked out in my favor.
I see.
I was glad to have a place to come back to.
Yeah, and so now you have a base of operations in Minakami here.
Yeah.
But you've also opened a restaurant. A couple of things.
Well, that came later. I mean, when I came back here, that's when I opened my food truck.
Right.
That's when I started my food truck.
Right, you had the food truck.
Yeah.
But that has morphed into now having a physical, like, brick and mortar restaurant.
That's right.
Here in Minakami.
That's correct.
During the spring and summer months.
Yeah.
And then during the winter, you're at a very popular ski town, Nozawa Onsen.
Correct.
Where people from all over the world come to ski and snowboard and enjoy winter sports and enjoy Japan as well.
Yeah.
Huge.
It is. It's a great little town. They've been able to, unlike Niseko, which is also great, but unlike Niseko, they've been able to preserve a lot of the traditional Japanese feel of the town. So when people come into Nozawa Onsen, they get something completely different than Hakuba or Niseko. It's a big part of my. It's my only professional sort of endeavor during the ski season. I focus on Nozawa, and it's a big part of my life now.
Awesome.
Is Nozawa.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to kind of shift. I think we've got like a picture of your story of what brought you to where you are now. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the experiences. Specifically in the communities in Japan, especially like you've mentioned, as a whitewater rafting guide, being part of a team is really, really important. And I imagine in many of those situations, you're on a team with people who maybe don't share the same language, the same native language as you. Like you have maybe, of course, Japanese people and English-speaking people, and maybe French or German or whatever speaking people.
Portuguese speaking people from Brazil. There was one fellow from Chile who spoke. I'm ignorant. Was it Spanish? Again, anyway. So you're right. There was a number of nationalities represented with a whole bunch of different first languages. But luckily, and I say that, most of them spoke English as a second language. And we all had varying degrees of Japanese proficiency too. That was one of the interesting things. I remember when I left Japan after 3.5 years, amongst the rafting guides or the non-native rafting guides, I was like one of the leaders. Like none of the guys could speak any Japanese at all. So if we had
really?
to go out, I had to take them. And then when I came back, I was at the very bottom of the rung because they had all stayed there for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm still at the bottom.
So was the rafting that you were doing were you primarily using? Let me backtrack. The Japanese that you picked up during those first 3 years then, would you say that was specifically for like rafting job specific stuff, or were you also able to pick up and study, just stuff you can use in the community?
Well, early on, I was I went to a couple of classes when I was an English teacher and picked up a very, very basic sort of, hello, how are you, Japanese? And then getting involved in rafting, of course, all of your customers, 99% of your customers are Japanese. So we were trained in how to do the safety talk, how to do the paddle talk, various instructions that you would then have to give to your customers to keep everyone safe. And you had to know those and know what they meant and when to use them. Otherwise, your team was not going to be safe.
Right.
So,
right.
So yeah, at that point, most of my Japanese was based on work.
Right.
Yeah.
And then has your Japanese ability progressed then as you've lived in Japan?
Yeah, especially coming back the second time. It's from 2007. Picked up lessons again early in that time, and then just immersing myself in a community and going out of my way to have friends who are not just English-speaking friends. Trying to make sure that I get involved in some things in the community, like I was telling you before about the taiko team, the Japanese taiko drum team.
Taiko drums. Yeah, the traditional drumming in Japan.
Yeah.
Super cool.
When I was able to be a regular there, I was the only non-Japanese person in the room. So, yeah, my Japanese has progressed just through use. Wouldn't say by osmosis. I actively try to find new vocabulary and new grammar. Well, it's not new to anyone else but me, but I actively try to find better ways to use it and better ways to make my Japanese more clear.
Right.
To natives, because I'm at that point now. Like I just did these tours with the All Blacks team.
That's right. You were helping with the Rugby World Cup in Japan.
That's
the
right.
2019 World Cup.
Yeah. So doing that required a certain level of Japanese.
Right.
I had to speak for people who had never been to Japan before. I had to be ready for emergencies. I had to have the confidence that I could take someone to a hospital and explain what their problem was, and I didn't end up having to do that, but I'd done that in the past, so I knew that I could. I know that I can. I think it's funny, like with anything else, when you are thrust into a situation, you cope. If I'm standing around in a bar in my place, and there's a fluent non-native Japanese speaker and some Japanese people, I'll always defer. Like if you and I go out, I'll always defer, and you do the talking.
I see.
It's because a confidence thing, I guess. But if you're not there, I still have a great time. I still have a great night, and then I talk because I have to. I have no choice. And my Japanese, I surprise myself at times because it's pretty good.
Yeah. Right?
But
you can do all the things that you've just described.
Exactly.
Yeah, not everybody can do that.
That's right. So, I'm not as surprised as I used to be, but it's certainly still a confidence thing because you always, no matter what you try to tell yourself, you always end up comparing yourself to the other guy.
Right.
And I know, like, you are fluent.
I do okay.
Yeah. And so if I'm out with you, I don't want to make a mistake, and you're not going to, so I'll just let you handle it.
I make mistakes all the time, to be clear. Oh my gosh, one of my favorite mistakes was when I went to Watering Hole, that beer bar in Yoyogi Park.
Right.
I went there and I wanted to order carrot sticks on the menu there.
Okay.
So you know the word for carrot, yeah?
Yes.
Ninjin. Ninjin. And so I looked at the menu and I picked it up and I was looking
and
at
you
it.
ordered human beings, didn't you?
I did. I said ningen stick, which means human stick, not ninjin stick. And as soon as the words were out of my mouth, the guy like next to me at the bar started laughing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. But the person who took my order, the wait staff there, what a kind soul, just went, "Kashikomarimashita." Which is, I've got it. Like, I understood. I took your order. And I was like, oh my God. But actually, like, my quick realization of the horrific mistake I just made, like, that spurred a conversation between me and the person sitting next to me, and he told me about this cool coffee shop where he goes sometimes. Yeah, but yeah, that was a little moment that I'll never forget. And now every time I go to order carrot anything anywhere, I'm very careful about that. Yeah. So everybody is out here making good mistakes.
Well,
like that.
Believe me, that's not the worst you could have done. I had a couple that were way embarrassing.
Oh, I'm sure. I can imagine some. Yeah. But going back a little bit to, I guess, kind of in the theme of comparing a little bit. Like, I'm a person that came to Tokyo. I came to the big city. I've had the big city foreigner experience, I suppose. Do you think, especially because kind of the time frame in which you first came to Japan was very different from mine, what was your experience of coming to a small town and being a foreigner? Like, were you like the kind of person that people read about on the internet that's like, wow, the foreign person, everybody go look at the foreign person? Like, I've heard some small town accounts of that where people will just stare and they'll kind of, I don't know, there's almost like a mascot level thing that I've read about, which is not to say that it's good or bad, but some people have expressed that they've had that experience. But what was your experience like when you first came to Japan?
I could say for sure that's true. It's valid. Especially my experience, because when I came in the early 90s, 93 was the first year that I touched Japanese soil. There wasn't as much tourism. There weren't as many foreigners working, even in the big cities. And being a 300-pound black man made me unique again. So people stopping to stare at me was not uncommon. And at first, I thought it was rude because I brought with me my Canadian sensibilities. I had to get over that. I had to realize that, it's not rude. I would do the same thing if, a green three-headed monster was dropped in my community.
I see.
I would stare. This is something you've never seen before. Even on television, it's rare to see someone who looks like me.
I see.
So I realized that pretty early, and I stopped being angry about it or confrontational about it, and I became more, inviting. So when I'd see, especially the children, when I see the children staring at me, they don't know what is rude or what isn't rude. They're just staring because they don't, they're curious.
Right.
So I would engage them. I would smile, I would wave. When I was more confident, I would even say hello, and and I still like to do that to this day. But things have changed a lot in terms of exposure, and especially here in this town where I've been for the better part of 20 years. I'm just a guy now.
Right.
When I walk down the street, everyone already knows me.
Right. You're a member of the community.
That's right. I'm just a guy. So I can tell the difference between a tourist to this town, like someone who's coming here for the adventure sports, and someone who lives here. I could tell the difference right away because it's the tourist who's staring at me.
Right.
So,
Right. That's interesting. That's so true, because that's something that you can't do in Tokyo. You can't point to someone and say, like, oh, that person's definitely a tourist. Like, in some cases you can. Like, they're very obvious looking. But here, for sure, where everybody knows everybody else, Like, when I've been driving in the car with you, you'll be, like, waving at people sometimes.
That's right.
Passing cars. And, I can't even imagine doing that in Tokyo, It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit then about perhaps, you mentioned very briefly, making rookie mistakes.
Yeah.
I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about something that you consider a rookie mistake and that you think, man, I wish I hadn't done that. Or maybe, like, I should have done that, but instead I did this other thing. Like,
right. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was sharing a story about that just a couple weeks ago at this All Blacks Tours event. I used to do a buffet lunch at Canyons. I'll explain. Canyons is an outdoor adventure company, and they have a base, and the customers would come in and do a trip in the morning, then they'd get lunch, and do a trip in the afternoon, and also I would make lunch for the guides who were doing 2 trips a day or whatever. So I do this buffet, and budget everything out. No, I'm going to need this much per person, and it's going to cost me this much per person. I did all the background work. I thought I was in good shape. I put the buffet out, and the guides especially, but also the customers, would come along and just smash it. They take way more than they were supposed to, way more than I had planned on, and usually my budget for the month was blown within two weeks. It was gone. I was done. And I was running in deficit. Which wasn't good for me. Wasn't good for the company. I wasn't making any money for the company. So I learned. I learned the thing that you have to do is serve it to them. Even as they're coming up to the buffet, there's got to be someone standing back there. You've got to eat the cost of adding an extra staff member to offset the cost of the waste. Because if you let them take it, they're going to take too much, leave it on their plate and walk away, and it ends up in the trash. But if you serve them a little bit, it's enough for their lunch. They're welcome to come back for more if that wasn't enough. But that way you don't get that kind of waste.
I see.
And most people will come back for a little bit more, and they'll say, not too much more. Just by having a presence there, a human presence there, they modify their behavior and moderate what they take. So that was a big lesson. I mean, in terms of how to stay on budget. Yeah, budgeting. I made a lot of budgeting errors early on, and I'm surprised they let me stay there for 5 years.
Well, if you were able to find a solution for it.
Yeah, eventually,
yeah,
absolutely.
Sense. It wasn't like you were just running into a hole for 5 years straight, I imagine. That would have been tougher. Okay, then more broadly perhaps, like for someone who is thinking of getting into food and beverage, or maybe is even interested in like outdoor sports or something similar, because Japan is huge for outdoor sports, especially in the winter.
Yeah.
Like there's so many people who come here. Like I've met many of like Australians going to Nozawa Onsen, where they come for the winter. They find a job in one of the small ski towns to stay there for the winter so they can ski and snowboard and have a great time.
That's right.
Like for somebody who's thinking, I would like to do that, or I'm curious about being able to do that specifically in Japan, do you have any like advice for them? Or maybe do's or don'ts?
Not really. I would just say do it. There's everybody's experience is going to be different. And some people are going to have a super positive experience, and some people are going to have a negative experience. Some people are going to leave and say, it wasn't for me, I didn't enjoy myself. Most people leave happy with memories, lots of friends, new friends. And so I'd say just do it. In terms of finding a job, it's not that hard. You find out which town you want to be in. And then social media these days has made it easy to find the establishments in that town. You write a letter or an email to 2 or 3 key influencers in that town. Just, I've received email letters from people looking for jobs in my place. And if I'm still looking for staff, I'll entertain them. If not, I'll pass them on to other people that I know who are looking.
Right.
So you just have to go ahead and take the initiative, go for it, and let them know what you want. And if no one's going to give you what you want unless they know.
Right.
So send a letter to anyone who runs an establishment in the town you want to go to.
Right.
And it'll get around.
Would you say that an experience like that, like coming to work for a season or something like that, if that's my first exposure to Japan, would that be a good introduction to Japanese culture, or would that be a good introduction to maybe food and beverage culture in Japan?
It is what you want it to be. Nozawa, like I said, has kept a lot of the Japanese tradition alive. So there are a lot of great Japanese establishments for food, beverage. Also, the onsen culture in Nozawa is
hot
huge.
Springs, yeah.
It's huge. So there's a lot of traditional Japanese experience available there. But you can also put your head in the sand and just go to the foreigner bar every night. eat at the hamburger place every night or the pizza place every night, and you can do that, and you can be very happy doing that. So it really depends on the person, what they want to get out of their experience. Mm-hmm. They're going to be able to find it.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. To change topics just a little bit,
sure.
As we're getting near the end of our time here, I was curious, you've been to countries other than Japan as well, right?
Yes, as a tourist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I was wondering have your experiences traveling to other countries, have you had maybe challenges in there that you haven't experienced in Japan? Or perhaps, or on the flip side of that, like exciting experiences that you couldn't imagine having in Japan.
Right. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an interesting question. 'Cause I don't... See, I've never thought of it that way, or thought of, like, my experiences in, say, visiting New Zealand. My experiences there were... I don't know, I just categorize them as that happened in New Zealand.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
right.
I've never sort of tried to transpose those events onto what would have happened if it happened in Japan. Mm-hmm. Never thought about it that way.
Like, I guess that does make sense, though. You know, just categorize it as part of like a trip that occurred to a place. Like, in thinking about like a way that I might answer this question is kind of like when I traveled to Thailand last February.
Sure.
It was, you know, going to these places, like these floating markets that I think of like, wow, that's something that's quite different from the like market culture in Japan.
Sure.
And admittedly, it is still a bit touristy to some degree, but while some locals still visit, to my understanding, the floating markets, that's something that was kind of unique for me to see, and also like to eat at those floating markets as well. Like, you know, eating these kind of, in some cases, a bit questionable things from sticks, you know. Starfish? I've never eaten starfish before.
In Hong Kong, I ate starfish on a stick.
Oh, see, that's something I've never seen in Japan before.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just those kinds of small experiences. It's like, that's something that I don't think I could experience in Japan, like my second home, or maybe it is my first home now. But that's also something I don't think you would experience like in the States, whereas from the first time. But those are kind of special little standout moments that I'm like, that's kind of. That maybe someone would interpret that as, wow, this is just so crazy. Like, all these boats are floating and you can just buy stuff from these people. Like, that's okay. Like, you know, like that's normal.
Yeah.
So, and the answer is yes.
So. I love new experiences traveling, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's when you learn about yourself, I think. Especially if it's a challenging experience, then you have to figure out how to cope.
Right.
You know, without a safety net.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're by yourself in a foreign country. There's nobody that you can turn to. There's no call mom or call dad in that situation.
I got lost in Ho Chi Minh once.
Really? I would like to hear that story.
I got on a taxi scooter.
Okay.
And I wanted to go shopping. I wanted to see another market because I was in the Ho Chi Minh area where all the bars and the hotels are. Everywhere, you know. I'm sure you've been.
I have not. No, it's on my list though.
So I was there, and I wanted to go elsewhere. I wanted to see something else. So I hailed a taxi, and it was a scooter, and I got on the back and went around this roundabout and the curve over here, and no idea where I am. But he took me to another market. And I got out, and I had a good look around, and then when I wanted to go back home, I didn't have the card from my hotel.
Nope.
I couldn't speak the language. Nobody spoke English. I just had no idea how to get back, even if I could hail a taxi.
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea how to get back to where I had to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up having, I found a guy who sort of worked with me. I had sign language. Like, I hailed another scooter, and I was saying, yeah, my place is near, can't now remember the name of the bar, but there was a really popular bar. So I said, okay, take me to this bar. Huh? And eventually he figured out which bar I wanted to go to. He took me there. I paid the fare, which was twice as much as the fare I paid to get where I was going. But it doesn't matter. Vietnamese dollars weren't very big at the time. Yeah, but that was a scary experience. Like,
Sure.
having no idea where I was going or where I was going to sleep, or yeah, it was crazy. But
Yeah, but I mean, kudos to that taxi driver
yeah,
for being willing to figure out,
yeah,
where
yeah,
you wanted to go.
yeah.
Not everybody would do that.
That's right.
Actually, like going back to Thailand, I had a taxi driver because there you have to barter with taxi drivers.
Oh, really?
Because you'll choose your fare. You'll agree on a fare before you even get in the car there. So you have to know roughly how much it costs to get to your destination. So
Right.
for us, we knew it was going to be like, I think, like 2,000 baht or so, which is about $20,
Right.
I believe, at the time. So we would sometimes we'd get a taxi and we'd be like, we want to go here, and the driver would be like, yeah, 4,000. And I was traveling with my sister-in-law, and one time this guy he gave us a way too high price. She just started laughing.
Right.
She just started laughing, and the guy rolled up his window and drove away. Like clearly he'd been called out on it.
Right.
But like they'll try to get people
Sure.
with that. They'll say like this much, and then you'll go, no, I'm not getting in your car until you say, until you give
Right.
me this price. So that's a little bit sketchy actually, and
Yeah.
like they're counting on visitors not knowing that
Exactly.
you have to do that and not knowing the correct price for that. So
That's
that
right.
can be tricky sometimes, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. Okay. Then I want to talk. Just wrapping up here, our last couple questions.
It's not sad. I'm ready to go.
A lot of people say that
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. I want to ask what are the restaurants you're operating now? Like if someone's visiting Minakami or someone's visiting Japan, like where can they come to eat? Or where can they come to explore the things you're offering?
Okay, great. Thank you.
What are your projects? What's coming up? What are you excited about?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. For my green season project, or my green season restaurant, is a pub in Minakami. It's called Ruins, and I opened it in Golden Week, as you know, traditional holiday in Japan, which
Yeah.
is the first week of May.
Yeah.
Usually, last year it was the end of April, but whatever. It's usually the first week of May. I open in Golden Week, and I go until the end of October. And that's the green season, and then everything sort of, the leaves are falling and it's getting cold. And then winter starts in December. Usually in Nozawa, and the snow will fall around a couple days before Christmas. So I'm always ready to go, have my restaurant open and ready to go by the 15th or so. And then it really depends on the snow when it actually opens.
Right.
But the restaurants in Nozawa, is the one I'm doing this year is called The Big Jerk. And that's a double entendre because, it's got my face on the logo, so everyone can know that I am the Big Jerk.
You are obviously a big jerk.
Obviously.
Clearly.
And but the food that I'm doing there, this is a special one for me because this is the first time since I started cooking professionally that I've had the confidence in not only in the business side of it, but the food, the cooking side of it, and the promotion side of it. I'm actually going to be doing my native Jamaican food. So it's the menu is centered around jerk chicken, hence the name, the Big Jerk. And then I go out from there with different types of Jamaican food that people may not have heard of and don't know exists. So I use the jerk chicken because it's very familiar to a lot of people. Hopefully that brings them in, but then I get a chance to educate them on some of the real gems and some of the real wonderful food that I grew up eating. That came from my mother's kitchen, my father's kitchen, my aunts and uncles. Everyone made some really, really incredible stuff that I'm nervous about trying to represent them.
Right, and you even made for dinner last night.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of sampling one of your upcoming dishes.
That's right.
The new to me Indonesian Jamaican kind of fusion, I guess.
Yeah.
The rendang curry.
That's right. It's
Super delicious.
It's called rendang, and a lot of people will have heard of rendang. It's usually a beef based dish that's popular in Indonesia and that part of Asia, but and India. And there's a huge Indian population in Jamaica and has been for many, many, many years, like generations. And so there's been sort of a fusion, but I'd say more of an evolution of this dish. Is made in Jamaica, and instead of being called rendang, the Jamaican patois, it's called rondong. And it's delicious. It's absolutely delicious. Coconut based, lemongrass, ginger, all of the aromatic flavors that you would expect out of an Indonesian dish, but with that Jamaican touch with the curry, and it's just I'm really excited about putting it on the menu.
Yeah, I enjoyed eating 2 helpings of it
Yes.
last night. It's so good.
I was gratified by your reaction to it.
I was into it. I liked it a lot. Okay. So we have Ruins and we have the Big Jerk. So
Yes.
Ruins is in summer, Big Jerk and Nozawa Onsen in the winter.
That's right.
Gotcha.
And yeah, more to come. More to come. I've always got my fingers or my sights set on something else. So, yeah, I've got other projects in the works, but
Right.
really not sure about. I don't want to mention them until they're actually up and running because I don't want to disappoint anyone.
Of course.
Or
Of course. So
Yeah.
if someone wants to make sure that they can keep up with all of your projects, where can they find you on social media?
Right. On Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm so old. I'm just trying to keep them straight. I have just started a page called The Big Jerk Nozawa.
Okay.
So you can find out what's going on there. Also, I have a website it's called kantodining.com.
Okay.
So this area of Japan is the Kanto. So yeah, the kantodining.com.
Okay.
It hasn't been updated in a while, but I've been working. I was just talking with my website designer, and we are going to update it by the end of December with my new projects.
Oh,
on
okay,
it.
great.
So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so we can put the links in the description for YouTube and the podcast as well if anybody
Lovely.
wants to check that out. And anything else that you want me to add, I'll put that there.
Thank you.
This brings us to the end of our talk, but is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yes.
Okay.
When I got the description of what was going to happen today, there was one question on there that really excited me that you didn't ask.
What was it?
It was about inspiration and who I would like to work with and collaborate with.
Oh, I had that on here, but I thought it would, I don't know, I thought
all
after
right.
everything we talked about. But yeah, please, if you have an inspiration, please share.
What inspires me is hard work and results and seeing people grow, and you are one of my inspirations.
Oh.
Absolutely, unequivocally, you are one of my inspirations. I know we're, in our relationship where we started with that company and that project, and when it ended, it didn't end in the best way, and it kind of left us both flat. And seeing where you've come from there, with your projects with YouTube and the English teaching and now what you're doing with this, it's incredible.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
incredible. And I hope that one day your cameras can be in my kitchen and we can do, I can teach somebody English through cooking. I'd love to
Yeah.
do something collaborative with you.
That's
I don't know,
awesome.
but that would be awesome.
Well, this is our first step in our collaboration.
Yes, indeed.
Awesome. That's very kind. I really appreciate it. On that note, then, I will say thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
so
I really
much for sharing
appreciate
your
you coming out
experience.
here. It's not an easy place to get to.
No,
So
but it's always so much fun to come.
Cool.
Thank you, Dex.
cheers. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Non-Native Creative. If you liked this episode, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments about this episode in the comments section too. Please make sure to stop by the project Patreon at patreon.com/nonnativeCreative. Patrons can get access to Patreon-only discussions, bonus behind-the-scenes media, interview transcripts, and access to patron-only live streams. Your support will help make sure the series can continue to share exciting, interesting stories from creative people working across borders. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.